if each of you wants to let us know what you're up to now, where you work, and what is the hardest question you feel like is to answer from your own perspective.
My name is Michelle Corbett. I work on the global marketing recruitment team over at L'Oreal USA. So I actually oversee recruitment for all 10 of our global marketing teams. I've been there for about 2.5 years, and before that I was working at a smaller company running our internship program. So really excited to be here with you tonight. In terms of the hardest interview question, God, I think I've gotten some weird curveballs like math questions and stuff like that, but I think for me the hardest one is tell me about a time that you've messed up. And for me it's like admitting something that you've done wrong is the new what's your biggest weakness, because you actually have to talk about a time when something did go wrong and how you're able to fix it and come back from that.
I'm Ralph Nader, the other R Nader. I recruit at Viacom. So for those of you who don't know, Viacom is a holding company for MTV, VH1, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, BET, CMT, Paramount Pictures, and I'm probably forgetting a few. So I recruit for all things digital within Viacom. So I work with all of the brands and anything that touches creative, digital, editorial, content creation, all of that is kind of my pod. I've been in entertainment recruiting for a while. I was at NBC Universal before that, and then worked on the agency side before that in executive search, some more senior level type recruiting. So that might be one of the harder questions actually I've gotten in a while, but I think that one of the toughest questions to answer is, why do you want this job, or why do you want to work for this company, or where do you see yourself going? Any variation of those three questions, because I think there's very simple answers to say, well, because I need a job, or because this is a cool company, or because I read the job description and I'm going to tell you what you want to hear. But what's a little bit more difficult is to actually explain your thought process behind what kind of career path you're trying to get for yourself long term. I think that's the hardest question to answer for an applicant, because you don't have the internal knowledge of what the paths within a company might look like. So to me, I would say that's probably the toughest one.
Hi everyone, I'm Adrienne O'Rourke. I'm an HR recruitment specialist at Emblem Health. Before that I worked at ABC, before that I worked at NBC with Ralph, and then I was an NBC page before that. So currently at Emblem Health, I manage the summer internship program, and I support all of the recruiters in all different areas of Emblem Health. So positions like finance, healthcare obviously, a lot of nursing, actuarial, everything you could think of to support the recruitment function of the company. My hardest question, I'll never forget, my first internship, I had a question that was just tell me about yourself, and I will never forget being frozen and not, where do I begin? How do I possibly answer that? And obviously it's a very typical one. So to piggyback off Ralph, like how to properly put that together in a short way but still emphasize exactly your strengths and where you see yourself. Definitely recommend putting something together, because that's such a common question, and now I know to expect that every time I go on an interview. So.
Hi, my name's Ashley Williams, and I'm actually the U.S. Programming Manager for Wix. And I'm essentially kind of the front lines of any time we're hiring for our U.S. community team, whether it's here in New York or San Francisco. My background before Wix has actually worked in the art business. I started my New York career at Sotheby's. I worked for an Upper East Side art gallery, and then I decided I wanted to work more kind of hands-on with creatives, so I came to Wix about 3 years ago. And started out as our client relations and events manager, and now I'm transitioning into a new role that's even more national. And I think for me, the hardest question I ever got in an interview was one that was very specific and very much dependent on my expertise. It was, who is your favorite artist that's exhibiting in Brooklyn right now? And even though I had a great, I could think of 3 or 4 answers because I was in the art business, I got very much inside my head. And I think anytime somebody in an interview has asked me something very specific that depends on my expertise, I start to doubt myself. And then I start obsessing over which is the right answer instead of just giving the answer that, pops into my head. And so I think that's one of the hardest things, at least for me, that's happened in interviews, is trying not to trip myself up. It's like you were saying, where suddenly your brain froze. And I have that exact same experience sometimes, like trusting myself and trusting my first instinct instead of panicking about what's the right answer and am I giving, the exact answer they want to hear.
Great. So to start off, what is, and maybe everyone can answer this one quickly, what is one of the first things you notice when someone walks into an interview room or you walk out to greet them in the waiting room?
I think the first thing I notice is definitely the outfit that they're wearing. It's just the first impression. It definitely stands strong. And, for me, it's always making sure that the outfit that they're wearing matches the company that they're interviewing for. So, if a girl's able to put together a great professional non-suit outfit, that's always like bonus points in my head. And same for guys, because L'Oreal's a pretty casual marketing company, but, still professional.
I think confidence is probably the first thing I notice. Anybody who can strike the right balance between confidence and being cocky is really the first thing, because you sort of notice the extremes. You kind of notice the super cocky people who just think like, this is beneath me, I'm just going to ace this, and the really non-confident folks who are just terrified of everything. So I think finding that happy kind of medium in there is probably the first thing I look for.
I was going to say something very similar, but a lot of times, even though this seems like number 101, people run late and they're sweating and they're nervous and anxious, and you just feel bad for them. So that would be the most thing for sure. You can tell right away when someone's prepared or not, if they've done their research, they left enough time to get there. It just seems so simple to me, but it happens pretty often where I have a call or an email that they're running late, and then they're more flustered and they're just not themselves. So that would definitely be the first thing I notice.
Yeah, exactly. Energy is definitely the first thing I notice, especially because what we do depends so much on being outgoing and energetic. So, do they have a big smile on their face? Do they look alert? Are they standing up really straight? You can really tell if somebody's radiating energy from that first glimpse at them.
Great. So let's get down to the questions. So from your point of view, how much of the questions you sort of have standardized, and how much do you sort of tweak and go along with the conversation as you get to know the person and meet the person?
So I've been recruiting officially for 2.5 years at L'Oreal, and sort of unofficially before that. So for both of the companies that I work for, the cultural piece is really, really important. And for us, the cultural piece is about, comfort with ambiguity and being okay wearing a lot of hats and flexing really easily. So at L'Oreal, no matter what role you're going into, that's a really key piece. So I think those questions for me are pretty standard, but those really come at the end. For me, I really want to get to know the candidate and their experience and what they've been able to contribute. So I will usually have some standardized questions about culture, but mostly just listening to the conversation and just trying to really get a sense of them and what they bring to the table.
Just go back to the last question for just half a second, because I think if you were to ask us what my top 5 was, it was one of each of those answers. So for those of you taking notes, preparedness, presentation, confidence, and energy are probably the top things to remember from the last one. As far as the questions that I ask, I would say I'm maybe 20 to 25% kind of pre-canned question. The rest of it is on the fly. There are certain vitals that we do need to get. For virtually every job, every candidate, there's a certain basic set of things that we need to understand about you before we can kind of build the bigger picture. So there's, I would say, maybe a quarter or less of like foundational questions, and then the rest of it will be determined by the interaction, the job, your answers, etc.
I'd have to say pretty much the exact same 25%. Yeah.
Well, everyone doesn't have to answer each question too. So if it was handled,
what he said.
So we'll move on to the next one. So I think people a lot of times are very anxious because they might come in on the defensive in a sense, and they're almost waiting to get tripped up. And I just wonder if anyone has any thoughts on, do you have questions that you present where you sort of have the expectation of, okay, if they're going to mess us up by saying X, Y, Z, or by not saying this, like, do you put things in there to sort of purposely try to, throw something unexpected at people?
Yes. Yeah, I do. There are certain situations that occur in everybody's careers, especially around job changes, where I am looking for certain triggers, because everybody will spin their own way of why they left a job or why they went to something else. And for me, I need to understand if you actually left as a career builder or if you left because there was an issue. And if there was an issue, is this something that's going to translate back to us? So for those types of situations, there are certain triggers that I will put in there just to see what comes out.
Can you give us an example of one of those trigger questions?
Well, I think if you ask someone, what led to your departure from point A to point B, and it's not something that's obvious on their resume. So for example, you're at a company as a manager of marketing, you go to another company as a senior manager of marketing, and you were at the first company for 3 years. That's fine. That's not raising a flag. That seems like a normal progression. But if you're there for 6 months or if you're there less, I may ask you directly, why did you leave? And at that point, I'm really listening for what you're not telling me, because most people will say something about, oh, there was a great opportunity presented to me. It's like, all right, but could you have created that opportunity internally at the company that you are at? And what kind of opportunities would you have gotten had you stayed there? And that's when you really kind of find out the truth starts coming out. Because if anybody ever tells you there was no opportunity for me to learn anymore, for me, that's a big red flag. Because no matter where you are, at whatever level you are, there's always something you can learn. It's all about how much you want to hustle for it. And so I think that's one of my triggers.
Great. So in terms of, did somebody else want to answer it? You good? Okay. So in terms of the tell me about yourself, so I think that's a really hard one. So we can maybe keep that off of the mock interview, because that can go in so many different directions. But what do you feel like makes up? What are the elements of a good answer to that question? Because I think that's right. Like you said, this is the most overwhelming one there is. So how might you recommend formulating the answer to that question?
Especially for this age group, I'd say where you went to school, what you majored in, if you are still in school, where you interned, or where you're currently working, maybe at a school, maybe if you have a school job or something like that. Kind of what I did before, where I used to work, where I'm working now, my main responsibilities. And I'd end it with your main passions and interests. I think that is what sticks out the most, because on a resume, obviously, if I brought you in, I know where you went to school, or I know where you worked, and that's what intrigued me to bring you in. But it's usually those last couple of sentences of that overview of yourself that may allow you to stick out rather than another applicant. So for a recruiter, someone could say, I really love connecting people, I love finding the right fit for people, and that to me would stick out more than, oh, I worked at NBC. Something that would allow you to stick out more than if you met with another person that worked at NBC or something like that.
So my advice to everyone is that interviewing is really about telling your story. And when you are given this sort of carte blanche, tell me about yourself, sometimes I'll ask people, tell me your story. So for me, it's about figuring out what that is and what are the relevant pieces of information that maybe I wouldn't get from reading the bullet points in your resume. So if where you were born is really relevant to why you're sitting in front of me right now, sure, add it in there. But I have definitely gotten those, well, I was born here, like the full life story. So for me, figure out, practice with friends. I've done that also, especially if you're switching jobs or something like that, to figure out what is that common thread, whether it's your extracurricular activities, your personal passions, or your previous internship or full-time opportunities. And tell me that sort of in a broader sense, because then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the projects you've owned and everything like that.
I think that's it is a tough question, because there is no right starting point or right end point. I personally hate that question, and what I can tell you is that you have to always know your audience. So go back to knowing the message you're trying to convey, because ultimately, I'm asking you that question, and you may get that question 50 times on 50 different interviews, but those 50 different interviews were at different companies, were different interviewers for different jobs. So if you're going to tell your story, try to keep your story relevant to the company and place you're interviewing, and that's going to help you sort of remove some redundancies. So if you feel like the where you were born part of it has absolutely nothing to do, maybe we don't start there. Maybe you start in college where you decided you wanted to be in fashion or cosmetics, and that's the story you tell. So draw the distinction, I think, in your head that question doesn't necessarily mean you're not talking to a therapist. You're there to get the job. You're not necessarily there to make a friend. So keep it relevant and on point. And I mean, don't lie, but you also don't have to tell the whole story.
Yeah, it sounds very similar to advice we give about cover letters and your resume, right? Like picking out just the important things and the things that will be most relevant to that specific job at that specific company. So I want to end before we do Q&A because, like I said, I want to save most of the time for the workshop. What is one story of an interview where you were just floored, that it went so well, that they were so prepared, they had great answers, and maybe just tell us a little bit about one of your favorite experiences as a recruiter?
Sure. For me, and we were talking about this earlier, at the end of the day, what really stands out in a lot of companies is passion. And being really knowledgeable and passionate about the role, the company, the brand that you're interviewing for really just makes such a difference. So I can't necessarily think of one because I meet so many people, it's hard to differentiate sometimes. But for me, what really stands out are the people who truly live and breathe, whether it's beauty or marketing, because those are the ones that you ask them those curveball questions or you ask them about a new product and they're not going to their canned responses. They're not going to try and find a brand in the L'Oreal portfolio to impress me. They're going to actual real life examples, and you can just tell when it's really genuine. So those are the ones that really stand out to me, is when I know that they're there because this is where they're dying to be. This is their dream job.
Yeah, passion is a big one. I think our main purpose as recruiters is to really determine your suitability for a specific role. And then secondary is to determine your suitability for the company. Because ultimately, we're not opening the doors for any job at the company, we're opening the doors for a specific job. So we have to identify kind of the must-haves of the positions and then the nice-to-haves. So as far as kind of my favorite stories and my favorite candidates, they're exactly what Michelle said. They're the people that are prepared, but prepared on a whole other level. So, working for a brand like Viacom and MTV, obviously it's a pop culture brand. So there's going to be things that everybody knows about that brand. And if my question is, hey, why do you want to work at MTV? And you pull an answer that I could get from any tourist in Times Square, no differentiator. But I actually have an interview coming in tomorrow. I spoke with her a couple days ago. I was floored. So when you talk about being floored, she's not even graduated yet, and I'm putting her in front of like 7 different people tomorrow because to me she's a must-have. And what totally set her apart was she knew my lingo, she knew the lingo that my teams use, she knew the space, and she was passionate about it. And to talk to someone who hasn't had the professional experience but still knows the language, knows the goals we're trying to reach, knows what the failures of our portfolio are. Like, the research that's on a totally different level tells us your passion. If you just research the website and it's information that's for everyone, cool, you're prepared, that's fine. But there's a difference between like prepared and passion, and that's where you really make the difference.
I'd say it's definitely a culmination of all of those things, that people have done their research, they're passionate, they're interested in the specific position compared to so many other companies or positions that are especially in New York. But it is just an amazing feeling when you work with someone from the beginning of the process, when you finally see that offer, and it's for someone that is truly genuine, they truly appreciate, and they truly worked really hard for the position. But usually 9 times out of 10, it's completely clear from their interviews, their follow-up, their research. But I definitely say it's a combination of everything. And unfortunately, one doesn't stick out. But I'm sure everyone can agree, when you find that correct placement, it's just one of the best feelings. And it's amazing to see.
Going along with that whole idea of passion, we're always really impressed when somebody applies for a job at Wix with the Wix website, because that shows, 1, initiative, they built a whole website to apply. 2, they clearly know the platform and the product. And to me, if you're applying to work at a company that their product is a means of communication, so if they help produce videos, maybe apply with a video. I've seen that, for example, Prezi actually requires people to apply with a Prezi now. We don't require people to apply with a Wix website because it's kind of nice to see who does it. See who has that initiative. So it shows if you actually can convey, like, I'm using the product, and like you said, like, they live and breathe beauty and marketing. It's that same sort of idea. If you can show, I actually use this, I love this, that kind of takes it the extra mile than just a paper resume.